Holding my two children by the hand, I rushed up the pristine driveway of our Atlanta home, desperate to tell my husband that I had just inherited $30 million and a commercial skyscraper in New York City. But my husband and his mistress were waiting for me on the front porch, divorce papers in hand. She smiled smugly at me and said, "Pack your bags, there's no room for a leech in this house." I just smiled and replied, "Okay." "What's so funny?" she snapped. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Actually, this house belongs to me." Before I dive into how I systematically dismantled their lives, tell me where you're watching this from in the comments below. Hit the like and subscribe button if you've ever had to remind someone of your true worth when they tried to tear you down. My name is Serafina. I am 34 years old, and for the last 7 years of my marriage, I was treated like a complete burden in my own home. I work as an independent crisis management consultant, a demanding job that I handle remotely while raising our 8-year-old son Leo and our 6-year-old daughter Zuri. My husband Marcus is a high-powered executive at a major financial group here in Atlanta. He makes incredible money, and he has never missed a single opportunity to remind me of it, in his eyes and the eyes of his entire family. My flexible schedule means I'm nothing more than a stay-at-home mom who plays on a laptop. They call me Leech behind my back, and sometimes make sure to say it just loud enough for me to hear. But that afternoon, everything was about to change forever. The heavy manila envelope resting inside my leather designer handbag felt like a physical shield against all their cruelty. Just 3 days earlier, I had received a shocking call from an elite Manhattan law firm. My uncle Elias had passed away. Uncle Elias was the black sheep of our family, a quiet, unassuming man who lived in Harlem and kept completely to himself. Growing up, my relatives used him as a cautionary tale, warning me not to end up alone and struggling like him. But Uncle Elias wasn't struggling at all. He was a ghost titan of New York real estate. He bought up dilapidated properties decades ago and held on to them as the city transformed around him. Because I was the only family member who ever bothered to call him on his birthdays, check on his health, and send him physical photo albums of my children, he left his entire hidden empire solely to me. I had just inherited $30 million in liquid cash and an iconic commercial office tower in the very heart of Midtown Manhattan. I steered our modest family SUV into our exclusive gated community, the tires humming softly against the freshly paved asphalt. It was a crisp autumn day in Atlanta, the kind of breathtaking afternoon where the sky is a brilliant cloudless blue and the air feels charged with endless possibility. In the back seat, Leah was explaining a very complicated video game strategy to Zuri, who was giggling and kicking her light-up sneakers against the back of my seat. Their innocent, bubbling joy was the truly perfect soundtrack for my euphoric mood. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my heart hammering a frantic, gleeful rhythm against my ribs. For years, Marcus had rigidly controlled every aspect of our finances. He gave me a strict household allowance, scrutinized my grocery receipts line by line, and belittled my consulting paychecks as cute little hobby money. Every time I tried to stand up for myself or demand an equal partnership, his family would rush to his defense. This was especially true of his brother David, and David's wife, Sarah. Sarah was a ruthless, highly successful real estate agent, a white woman who constantly prided herself on bringing what she called high class and sophistication to our family gatherings. She constantly flaunted her luxury designer bags and boasted about her 6-figure commissions, going out of her way to ensure I felt as small, pathetic, and dependent as possible. But today, I was going to walk into my house and hand Marcus the verified legal documents, proving that I was now worth more than his entire executive board combined. I vividly pictured the look of stunned respect that would finally flood his handsome face. I imagined him apologizing for the years of financial control and emotional neglect. I foolishly thought this incredible wealth would instantly level the playing field and save our rapidly fracturing marriage. I truly believed that $30 million would finally buy me the basic human dignity I had been craving from the man I loved. I turned onto our street, the familiar row of manicured lawns and stately brick homes coming into view. I parked the car in the driveway, unbuckled my seatbelt, and let out a long, shaky breath to steady my nerves. This was it, the beautiful start of a brand new chapter. I hopped out of the driver's seat, the cool wind whipping my hair across my face, and opened the back doors to help Leo and Zuri out of their car seats. "Grab your backpacks, guys," I said, keeping my voice bright and steady. "Daddy's home early today, and Mommy has a huge surprise for everyone." We started walking up the long, curving concrete path toward the front door. Dry autumn leaves crunched under my boots, a crisp sound that usually brought me a deep sense of comfort. But as we passed the tall oak tree that partially blocked the view of our front porch, my steps began to slow. The joyful anticipation that had been bubbling in my chest instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, heavy dread that dropped straight to the pit of my stomach. There was a vehicle parked haphazardly near the driveway, partially blocking the walkway to the porch steps. It was a pristine white Range Rover with custom matte black rims. I knew that car intimately. It belonged to Sarah. She never visited our home during the week. In fact, she actively avoided our home unless there was a mandatory family event where she could show off a new outfit or a sparkling piece of jewelry. Her presence here on a random Tuesday afternoon was completely out of character and set off every single alarm bell in my head. The autumn wind suddenly felt sharp instead of refreshing. The peaceful, quiet atmosphere of our suburban street seemed to warp the silence, turning it thick and oppressive. My grip tightened instinctively on my children's small hands. "Mommy, you're squeezing too hard," Leo complained quietly, trying to pull his hand free. I mumbled a quick apology and loosened my hold, but my eyes remained locked on the front porch. Through the decorative wrought iron railing of our veranda, I saw them. Marcus was leaning casually against the heavy oak front door, with his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing his expensive custom-tailored navy suit, the specific one he reserved for important board meetings and high-stakes negotiations. But he wasn't alone. Standing right beside him, so close that their shoulders were practically touching, was Sarah. She was wearing a sleek, tailored blazer and holding a thick stack of manila folders. Even from the end of the driveway, I could clearly see the sharp, predatory curve of her smile. There was absolutely no familiar warmth in their posture. They didn't look like family members waiting to greet me. They looked like a firing squad waiting for their target to arrive. All my beautiful fantasies of sharing my incredible news, of saving our struggling marriage, and of finally earning my husband's respect died right there on the cold pavement. The heavy manila envelope resting inside my handbag suddenly felt less like a shield and more like a weapon I was about to need. I didn't know exactly what those papers were in Sarah's hands yet. But as I looked into the cold, unfamiliar eyes of my husband, I knew with undeniable certainty that my life was about to become a battlefield. I stopped at the edge of the driveway and turned quickly to Leo and Zuri. I kept my voice light, masking the sudden tremor in my chest. "Play in the back seat for a little bit, guys," I told them, closing the car doors and leaving the air conditioning running. "Mommy needs to talk to Daddy about some grown-up stuff." I turned back around and walked the rest of the way up the concrete path alone. Each step felt heavier than the last. The closer I got, the more the details of their betrayal came into focus. Sarah wasn't just standing next to Marcus. She was practically leaning her weight against him, her manicured fingers resting casually on the sleeve of his expensive navy suit. Marcus didn't flinch or pull away. He just watched me approach with an expression made of pure ice. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady as I reached the bottom of the porch steps. "What's going on here? Why is David's wife waiting on our front porch?" Sarah didn't even give Marcus a chance to speak. She stepped forward, her expensive heels making a sharp clicking sound against the concrete. She looked down at me from the elevated porch as if I were a piece of trash that had blown into her immaculate garden. "It's not your front porch anymore, Serafina," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "and to be honest, It never really was. She shoved a thick stack of manila folders toward my chest. I didn't reach out to take them, so she simply let go. The papers hit the porch with a dull thud, sliding just enough for me to read the bold black lettering at the top of the first page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I stared at the papers, then slowly lifted my eyes to my husband. Marcus finally peeled himself away from the doorframe, glanced down at the divorce papers, then back up at me. His face was completely devoid of warmth, guilt, or hesitation. Sign them, he demanded, his tone flat and corporate, exactly how he spoke to his underperforming employees. I've already filed the preliminary paperwork. My lawyer fast-tracked the process. We're done. I stood there frozen, my mind racing to process the sheer cruelty of their timing. You're divorcing me right here on the front porch while our children are sitting in the car right behind me? Sarah scoffed, rolling her eyes as if I were being completely unreasonable. Don't play the victim, Serafina. Marcus is done carrying your dead weight. You contribute absolutely nothing to this household. You sit around all day pretending your little freelance consulting gigs actually matter while he kills himself paying for your lifestyle. She took another step closer, her blue eyes narrowing with undisguised contempt. You're a leech, and frankly, this entire family is exhausted pretending otherwise. Pack your bags. There's no room for a freeloader in this house. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to defend me. I waited for him to stand up for his wife of 7 years against the blatant disrespect of his brother's wife. Instead, he nodded in agreement, shifting his weight to stand closer to Sarah. Sarah's right, Marcus said, crossing his arms over his chest. I'm tired of financing your life. I want you to pack your bags and be out of this house tonight. You can take the kids to your friend's apartment or book a cheap motel. I don't care, but you are not sleeping under my roof ever again. The sheer audacity of his demand hit me like a physical blow. He was throwing the mother of his children out on the street with zero warning, all while standing shoulder to shoulder with the woman he was clearly sleeping with. I looked between the two of them, the matching arrogance, the shared entitlement, the way Sarah was looking at my house as if she had already mentally redecorated the living room. It all clicked into place. This wasn't a sudden decision. They had planned this carefully, waiting for the perfect moment to catch me off guard and leave me scrambling to survive. A normal person would have crumbled. A normal wife would have dropped to her knees, cried, begged for an explanation, or screamed in devastation at the sudden destruction of her family. For a split second, that familiar panic threatened to rise in my throat. I felt the sharp sting of tears pressing behind my eyes, but then the thick leather strap of my handbag dug into my shoulder. The heavy envelope inside pressed firmly against my ribs. A $30 million secret resting silently at my side. The deed to a Manhattan skyscraper right next to my car keys. The panic instantly subsided, the fear completely evaporated, replaced by a cold calculating clarity. I looked down at the divorce papers, scattered on the concrete. Then I looked back up at my husband and his mistress. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I felt the corners of my mouth slowly curve upward. A genuine chilling smile spread across my face, creating a stark, eerie contrast to the absolute devastation they clearly expected to see. Marcus's brow furrowed, his arrogant posture faltering for a split second. He seemed genuinely thrown off by my reaction. What's so funny? He snapped, his voice losing some of its corporate edge. I tilted my head, looking him directly in the eyes, and let my smile get even wider. Okay, I said quietly, my voice laced with a terrifying certainty. Sarah crossed her arms, glaring down at me. Okay, that's all you have to say? You're being thrown out on the street? You think you can throw me out? I replied, holding unbroken eye contact with the man who had just thrown our vows in the trash. That's adorable. To truly understand the profound joy of looking my cheating husband in the eye and watching his arrogance falter, you have to understand the suffocating reality I had been trapped in. Allow me to take you back to a typical morning just 2 weeks before that front porch confrontation, so you can see exactly how invisible the chains of my marriage had become. The morning sun streamed through the expensive plantation shutters in our kitchen, hitting the pristine quartz countertops that Marcus insisted we needed to maintain our property value. I was standing at the stove, carefully flipping eggs and plating bacon for Leo and Zuri, who were upstairs getting dressed for school. The smell of freshly brewed espresso filled the air. Marcus was sitting at the head of the large mahogany dining table, fully dressed in another immaculate designer suit. He looked every bit the perfect executive, the pride of his firm, the ultimate provider. But his eyes were glued to his tablet and his jaw was tight. "Serafina," he said, not bothering to look up from the glowing screen. "Would you mind explaining this transaction from yesterday afternoon?" I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked over, already feeling the familiar, weary knot forming in my stomach. I glanced at the screen. It was a charge from our local premium grocery store for $140. "I bought groceries for the house," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "The kids needed fresh fruit for their school lunches, and I bought the ingredients for the salmon dinner you requested for tonight." Marcus sighed heavily, tapping his manicured finger against the edge of the tablet. "The $140 for fruit and fish. Do you have any concept of a budget, or do you just swipe the card and assume the money magically replenishes itself?" "We've talked about this. You need to run a cost-benefit analysis before you check out." He was speaking to me in the same way he would reprimand a junior analyst who had botched a quarterly report. I gripped the back of a dining chair, forcing myself to take a slow, deep breath. "Marcus, it's organic berries for your children," I replied quietly, conscious that Leo and Zuri could be down the stairs at any moment. "I'm not buying luxury items for myself. I am feeding our family." He finally looked up, his dark eyes completely devoid of affection. "You're spending my money, Serafina. That's the point. I work 50 to 60 hours a week managing high-yield portfolios, bringing in real wealth to sustain this lifestyle. You swipe a piece of plastic that I finance. I expect you to respect the capital I generate. If you want to blow $140 on premium snacks, you can use your own money." I felt a sharp flash of outrage. "I do use my own money, Marcus. My consulting invoices pay for Leo's private math tutor and Zuri's gymnastics lessons. I do contribute to this household." Marcus let out a short, dismissive laugh that felt like a slap to the face. "Your consulting business?" He used air quotes with his fingers. "Serafina, you answer a few emails from your laptop in between folding laundry. You do crisis management for minor companies no one has ever heard of. It's a cute hobby. And I'm glad it keeps you busy. But let's not pretend your little side hustle carries any real weight around here. Your monthly paychecks barely cover the utility bills for a house this size. I am the primary shareholder in this family." The financial manipulation wasn't new. It had started subtly during my second pregnancy, right after I decided to leave my demanding corporate agency job to go freelance so I could be present for our babies. At first, Marcus framed it as a way to take the pressure off me. He offered to handle all the major bills, moving our joint savings into a high-yield account that only he had the administrative passwords for. He set me up with a household expense card, calling it a streamlined budgeting tool. I was too exhausted from late-night feedings and the early toddler years to argue with him about logistics. By the time I realized the cage door had been locked, the key was completely out of my reach. I was a highly educated, capable woman who successfully managed PR disasters for regional brands. Yet, I was reduced to asking my husband's permission to buy a new pair of winter boots for our son. Every time I landed a new client, Marcus would find a way to belittle the contract, ensuring I never felt truly independent. He needed me to feel small so he could feel enormous. Footsteps pounded on the hardwood stairs in the hall. Leo and Zuri burst into the kitchen, their backpacks bouncing against their shoulders, bickering over who got to sit in the chair closest to the window. Instantly, the cold, calculating executive vanished. Marcus transformed into the charismatic doing father the rest of Atlanta society believed him to be. He broke into a wide, brilliant smile, opening his arms as Zuri ran to hug his waist. "There are my brilliant kids," Marcus cheered, kissing the top of Zuri's head and giving Leo a playful fist bump. Are you ready to conquer the day and make Daddy proud? Yes, Daddy, they chorused in unison, climbing into their seats as I placed their hot breakfast plates in front of them. Marcus stood up, grabbing his sleek leather briefcase and adjusting his silk tie. He walked past me, leaning in to give me a brief, completely performative peck on the cheek. Try to be more mindful today, Serafina, he whispered directly into my ear, his tone dropping back to that icy corporate register. I'll be reviewing the statements again tonight. He walked out the door, leaving me standing in the center of the beautiful kitchen he loved to remind me I didn't own. I watched my children eat their breakfast, their faces bright and completely unaware of the toxic power dynamic that was silently suffocating their mother. I swallowed the bitter lump of humiliation in my throat and poured myself a cup of coffee. I endured the daily disrespect, the financial abuse, and the constant belittling because I wanted my children to have a stable two-parent home. I had grown up watching families fracture over money, and I was desperately trying to maintain the flawless image of our successful, well-off family. I took the emotional hits so my kids would never have to feel the impact. I justified the pain by telling myself Marcus was just stressed from his high-pressure career, that his arrogance was simply a byproduct of his ambition. I chose peace over pride, convincing myself that shrinking in his shadow was the only way to keep our family together. I put up with his financial tyranny because I thought I had no other choice. I didn't know then that my quiet endurance was simply buying him the time and the funds he needed to finance a secret life right behind my back. The illusion of our perfect family was on full display just a few days later during our annual end of summer barbecue. I had spent the entire weekend preparing. The massive smoker in the corner of the patio was working overtime, filling the humid Atlanta air with the rich, savory scent of hickory wood and slow-roasted brisket. I had arranged elaborate floral centerpieces for the patio tables and made sure the outdoor bar was fully stocked with premium liquor. The backyard was absolutely packed with Marcus's colleagues from the financial firm, extended family members, and the elite circle of professionals he insisted we associate with to maintain our social standing. I was weaving my way through the crowded patio with a silver tray of grilled shrimp skewers, playing the part of the flawless, supportive wife, when the atmosphere suddenly and sharply shifted. David, Marcus's older brother, walked through the wrought iron side gate, and right beside him, demanding the attention of every single person on the patio, was Sarah. While the rest of our guests wore chic but comfortable summer attire, Sarah was wearing a skin-tight, pure white designer midi dress that was completely inappropriate for a casual backyard barbecue. She had a limited edition Birkin bag slung over her forearm, positioning it carefully so the iconic logo would catch the afternoon sun. As a white woman who had married into our prominent African-American family, Sarah had always overcompensated. She made up for it with a bizarre, desperate need to prove she was the wealthiest, most sophisticated person in any room we entered. And she usually accomplished it by stepping directly on my neck. She ignored me completely as she swept past the appetizer station, treating the hired staff like invisible furniture as she made a beeline straight for Marcus. I watched from a few feet away as she threw her arms around my husband's neck, pressing herself against his chest in a greeting that lasted a split second too long. Marcus didn't flinch, he didn't step back. In fact, his large hands rested comfortably on her waist before David finally caught up to them, completely oblivious to the lingering tension. Marcus, you look absolutely incredible, Sarah purred, her voice carrying over the ambient chatter of the party. That new promotion suits you so well. I was just telling David on the way over that you're practically carrying the legacy of this entire family on your shoulders. You have such exquisite taste in everything you do. She gestured vaguely at the sprawling brick house and the expensive food spread, completely ignoring the undeniable fact that I had personally orchestrated every single detail of this event while Marcus played golf all morning. Marcus chuckled, puffing out his chest as he swirled the expensive bourbon in his crystal glass. Well, you know how it is, Sarah. Somebody's got to keep the engine running and make sure the standard stays high. Can't let my team down. I walked over, forcing a polite, welcoming smile as I offered them the tray of appetizers. Sarah glanced down at the perfectly arranged food, then dragged her icy blue eyes slowly up and down my casual linen sundress, her lips curling into a sharp, condescending smirk. "Oh, Serafina," she said, her tone dripping with a fake sugary sweetness. "Look at you working so hard playing hostess. It's really sweet how you try to keep yourself busy while Marcus handles all the real business." I kept my expression perfectly neutral, though my knuckles went white as my grip on the silver tray tightened. "I run my own consulting business, Sarah. I'm perfectly capable of handling real business and catering to our guests at the same time." Sarah let out a loud, tinkling laugh that immediately drew the attention of several nearby guests. A few of Marcus's junior colleagues turned their heads. Their conversations stalled as they watched the exchange. Consulting business," she repeated, projecting her voice so the people at the adjacent tables could hear every word. "Right. David told me you help out little local shops or something. It's adorable, but let's be honest, Serafina, we all know who really pays the mortgage on this massive property." She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, her eyes locked on mine with pure malicious intent. "It must be incredibly relaxing to just wake up, play on your laptop for a few hours, and let a man like Marcus fund your entire existence. Some women really hit the lottery, don't they? If you didn't have Marcus carrying you, providing this luxurious safety net, you wouldn't even be able to set foot in a neighborhood like this. You're just so lucky he's generous enough to support you." The patio fell uncomfortably silent. The upbeat jazz music playing from the outdoor speakers suddenly seemed far too quiet. I felt the hot, prickling burn of absolute humiliation creeping up my neck and searing my cheeks. I looked directly at Marcus. I waited for him to shut her down. I waited for my husband, the man who had promised to protect and honor me, to tell his sister-in-law that she was crossing a massive, unforgivable line. I waited for him to remind her that I had sacrificed my own corporate career, stepping back from a high-powered agency position to raise his children so he could achieve his executive status, without worrying about childcare. Marcus looked at me, looked at Sarah, and then he laughed. It wasn't an awkward, forced laugh to diffuse the tension. It was a deep, rumbling laugh of genuine agreement. "Come on, Sarah," Marcus said, slinging a casual arm around her shoulder as he looked out at our silent guests. "Don't go giving away all her secrets. Serafina knows she's got it good here. I always tell her, as long as she keeps the house looking this nice and the kids out of my hair during my board meetings, I don't mind letting her use the credit card. Somebody's got to sponsor the lifestyle, right?" A few of his colleagues laughed nervously, eager to agree with their wealthy boss. David just awkwardly scratched the back of his neck, staring down at his expensive loafers too cowardly to correct either his wife or his brother. I stood frozen in the center of my own backyard. The public humiliation washed over me like a bucket of ice water, shutting my system down completely. He was validating her disrespect. He was actively participating in my degradation in front of our friends, our family, and his coworkers. He was confirming the exact toxic narrative Sarah wanted to push, that I was nothing more than a gold-digging leech who had latched onto a successful man. In that singular agonizing moment, the last remaining thread of my patience completely snapped. The quiet devotion and tolerance I had maintained for 7 long years evaporated into the humid Georgia air. I realized my silence wasn't buying peace. My silence was simply buying them a target. Marcus didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a dependent, a convenient accessory he could make fun of whenever he needed to boost his own fragile ego or impress his cruel sister-in-law. I didn't throw the heavy silver tray. I didn't scream. I didn't give them the satisfaction of the angry, emotional reaction they were clearly trying to provoke from me. I simply set the tray down on the nearest patio table, smoothed the front of my linen dress, and looked Marcus directly in the eye. "Enjoy the party, Marcus," I said, my voice eerily calm and so low he had to lean in slightly to hear me. Because this is the last time I will ever play the role of the supportive wife for a man who acts like a coward. I turned and walked away with my back perfectly straight, completely ignoring the sudden, frantic whispers that erupted behind me as I headed for the glass patio doors. As I stepped back into the cool, air-conditioned sanctuary of the house, leaving the noise of the barbecue behind, my mind was racing with a terrifying absolute clarity. I was done shrinking. I was done asking for permission to exist in my own life. If they wanted to treat me like a calculating opportunist, then it was time for me to stop playing the victim and start playing the game. I walked straight down the hall and into Marcus's home office. I closed the heavy wooden door behind me, the solid click of the lock sounding incredibly final in the silent room. I sat down at his pristine mahogany desk and stared at the glowing screen of his personal tablet resting on the leather bladder. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness. I was vibrating with a new dangerous energy. The ultimate limit of my endurance had been passed, and there was no turning back. I stared at the glowing screen of Marcus's personal tablet resting on the pristine leather blot. It was the device he guarded with his life, the digital vault he used to control our family budget, monitor my spending, and maintain his total authority. For years, I had foolishly respected his privacy, believing his lies about strict corporate security protocols and sensitive client portfolios. But respect is a two-way street, and he had just bulldozed mine in front of half of Atlanta. I reached out and tapped the screen. The numeric passcode request immediately popped up. Marcus was a creature of massive ego. He truly believed he was the smartest man in any room, which made him incredibly arrogant and consequently highly predictable. I didn't try our anniversary date or our children's birthdays because Marcus only truly cared about one thing. I typed in the exact date of his first major executive promotion at the financial firm. The screen unlocked instantly. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands remained completely steady. I opened his primary email application, scrolling past the daily corporate memos, luxury car dealership promotions, and exclusive golf club newsletters. I was looking for the bank statements he claimed were too complicated for my freelanced consultant brain to understand. I wanted to see the exact numbers he held over my head every single day. Instead, a push notification dropped down from the top of the screen. It was an alert from our private wealth management banking app, a system he had explicitly locked me out of 2 years ago under the guise of simplifying our taxes. The banner read "Wire transfer completed." I tapped the notification, holding my breath as the banking app loaded with a secure Face ID bypass he had carelessly left disabled for his home network. The screen populated with the details of a transaction executed just the previous evening at roughly the same time I was busy marinating meat and setting up heavy patio furniture for his precious guests. The amount transferred was exactly $50,000. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes and reading the digits again to make sure the screen's glare wasn't playing tricks on me. Juan Mayan. This was the same man who had coldly bared me over $10 in organic berries just 2 weeks ago. He had ruthlessly lectured me about respecting the capital he generated, treating me like a reckless child for buying groceries for his own son and daughter. Yet here he was silently moving a small fortune with a single casual swipe of his finger. I tracked the digital receipt to the recipient's details. The funds had been wired to an external business checking account registered under the name S.R. Reilly LLC. A sharp, icy chill shot through my entire body, rooting me to the heavy leather desk chair. Sarah, my sister-in-law, ran a boutique luxury brokerage under that exact legal entity name. Why on earth would my husband wire $50,000 of our money to his wife? It wasn't a casual family loan. And considering her endless bragging about her own wealth, it certainly wasn't charity. $50,000 in the world of high-end real estate meant only one thing. It was earnest money. It was a down payment. I needed to know where that kind of liquid cash had come from. I clicked on the source's account details. expecting to see the joint savings Marcus had walled me off from, but the account number didn't match our savings at all. It was a completely different line of credit, one I had never seen in our 7 years of marriage, friend. I clicked on the account profile, and the breath caught in my throat completely. It was listed as a home equity line of credit, drawn directly against the deed of our primary residence, our house, the home where I was raising my children. Marcus had secretly taken out a massive loan against our family's property. He must have forged my signature or bribed a shady notary to bypass my legal consent entirely. He had leveraged the roof over his children's heads to extract a mountain of cash, and he was funneling that money directly to Sarah. The puzzle pieces began to click together with a terrifying, undeniable precision. I thought back to the scene unfolding on the patio just outside the window. The lingering touches, the way she pressed herself against his chest, the way he defended her blatant disrespect of his wife. They weren't just flirting to humiliate me, they were doing business together behind my back. Or worse, they were building a whole new life together, using my home as their collateral. Through the thick glass of the office window came the muffled sounds of the barbecue. I could hear the upbeat music, the clinking of glasses, and suddenly the sharp, distinctive sound of Sarah's laughter cutting through the noise. She was out there gloating, pining in her designer dress, drinking my champagne, knowing that she and my husband had just stolen $50,000 from right under my nose. The betrayal was so profound, so calculatingly deep, that it bypassed sadness entirely and mutated directly into a cold, lethal focus. Marcus had escalated from an emotionally abusive husband to a financial criminal. He was actively destroying my children's security to fund whatever secret project he was building with a woman who despised me. Suddenly, the heavy brass knob of the office door rattled violently. Someone was trying to get in. "Serafina, are you in there?" It was Marcus. His voice sounded muffled through the thick wood of the door, but the deep annoyance in his tone was unmistakable. He jiggled the knob again, this time harder. "Open the door, Serafina. People are asking where the hostess went, and it looks pathetic for you to be hiding in here. Sulking just because Sarah made a joke. Get out here and do your job." I quickly locked the tablet screen, erasing any trace of my digital intrusion, and placed it back exactly where I had found it on the leather blotter. I stood up, taking one last steadying breath. I smoothed the non-existent wrinkles from my linen dress and squared my shoulders. I had walked into this office, a humiliated, exhausted wife, but I was walking out a woman armed with the truth. I strode forward and undid the deadbolt. I pulled the heavy wooden door open, plastering a flawless, perfectly pleasant smile on my face as I met my husband's irritated gaze. I was no longer interested in crying over his betrayal or begging for his respect. I was completely focused on finding out exactly what property he was buying with Sarah and precisely how I was going to burn it to the ground. "Sorry, honey," I lied, my voice dripping honey as I swept past him into the hall. "I just needed to grab a fresh bottle of your favorite bourbon from the reserve closet." The guests were running low. Marcus instantly relaxed, his inflated ego soothed by my apparent submissiveness. "Good girl," he grunted, adjusting his cufflinks. "Make sure David gets a taste of that." For the rest of the barbecue, I delivered the performance of a lifetime. I floated between the patio tables, clearing empty plates and laughing at terribly unfunny jokes told by arrogant bankers. Every time I saw Sarah, I didn't glare. I offered her a fresh cocktail. I watched her whisper in my husband's ear near the smoker and smiled from across the patio. The pain of their betrayal was a living, throbbing thing clawing at my ribs, but my professional training took over. In crisis management, the first rule is to never let the opposition know you've identified the threat. You contain the narrative, you control the variables, and you strike only when your victory is mathematically certain. It was 7 agonizing hours before the last guest left, and the house finally fell silent. Marcus had consumed enough premium liquor to ensure a heavy, dreamless sleep. I lay rigid beside him in our king-sized bed, listening to the steady, rhythmic sound of his breathing. When the bedside clock ticked over to 2 a.m., I slipped out from under the duvet. I crept down the hall to my small home office space, wrapping myself in a thick cashmere cardigan to ward off the midnight chill. I opened my laptop, the screen casting a pale blue glow on my face. It was time to get to work. People leave digital footprints everywhere, especially people who believe they're untouchable. Marcus thought I was just a housewife with a hobby, forgetting that my actual job involved burying corporate scandals and tracking down leaked information before the press could weaponize it. I didn't need his primary tablet anymore. I needed the secondary email account he had set up years ago. The one he claimed was just for fantasy football leagues and junk mail. Gaining access was almost insultingly easy. Marcus used a variation of his fraternity initiation year for his secondary passwords. I typed it in. I bypassed the generic security question by answering a query about his first sports car, and I was in. The inbox loaded. My eyes scanned the subject lines, filtering out the actual spam and zeroing in on a specific chain of correspondence from a title and escrow company based in Buckhead. I clicked on the first email, my breath catching in my throat. It was a congratulatory message from a closing agent confirming the receipt of a $50,000 wire transfer for a luxury penthouse unit at the Soberin, one of the most exclusive high-rises in Atlanta. But it wasn't the real estate transaction that chilled my blood. It was the forwarded email chain attached to the bottom of the document. I scrolled down, reading the messages exchanged between Marcus and Sarah over the last 48 hours. They weren't just discussing square footage and HOA fees, they were discussing their future. "I can't wait to finally have our own space," Sarah had written, complete with a nauseating heart emoji. "David is driving me crazy and I'm so tired of sneaking around hotels. This penthouse is going to be our perfect nest, babe." The wire cleared. "We close next month. Soon. We won't have to hide anymore. Just let me handle the dead weight at home first. I need to make sure the post-nut paperwork is ironclad so she walks away with nothing." Marcus had replied, just hours before our barbecue. The dead weight was me, the mother of his children. I kept scrolling, digging deeper into the archived folders. I found hotel reservations stretching back 2 full years, weekend getaways disguised as corporate retreats, expensive jewelry purchases shipped directly to Sarah's office. They had been sleeping together, laughing at me, and plotting my financial ruin for 24 months. My husband and his brother's wife were actively conspiring to leave their spouses and build a life of luxury together, using the equity from my family's home. A violent wave of nausea hit me. I clapped a hand over my mouth, pushed my chair back, and ran to the adjoining guest bathroom. I fell to my knees on the cold tile floor, gripping the edges of the porcelain toilet bowl. As my stomach heaved, the physical reality of the betrayal was paralyzing. 2 years of lies, 2 years of sharing a bed with a man who was silently draining our assets to build a love nest for his mistress. Hot, furious tears finally spilled from my eyelashes. I allowed myself to cry, but only for exactly 60 seconds. I timed it on the digital clock glowing on the bathroom counter. When the minute was up, I pushed myself to my feet, turned on the faucet, and splashed ice-cold water on my face. I stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot and my hands were still shaking, but the weakness was gone. I walked back to my laptop and began to download everything. I exported the email chains, the bank routing numbers, the hotel receipts, and the title company documents. I created a secure encrypted folder on a hidden cloud drive, backing up every single piece of evidence. Marcus wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial ruin, but he had drastically underestimated his opponent. I closed the laptop and slipped back into our master bedroom. I slid under the covers next to the man who was actively trying to destroy me. He shifted in his sleep, his arm thrown casually over my waist. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to shove him off the mattress. Instead, I lay perfectly still, staring up at the dark ceiling. I would have to wake up tomorrow and make him breakfast. I would have to kiss his cheek, ask about his day, and play the part of the oblivious, beautiful wife. I would have to swallow the bile in my throat every time he spoke to me, but I could do it. I would endure the knowing acidic pain of his betrayal because I was no longer fighting for my marriage. I was fighting for my children, my dignity, and my absolute revenge. Marcus and Sarah thought they had already won. They thought they had secured their glamorous future. They had no idea that I was silently holding the match that would burn their entire world to ash. I spent the next 3 days delivering an Oscar-worthy performance. I poured his coffee. I smiled at his dry corporate jokes. I kissed his cheek when he left for work. Every gesture was calculated. A temporary down payment on his ultimate destruction. But my ironclad composure shattered on a rainy Thursday morning when my cell phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar Manhattan area code. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and swiped to answer. "Am I speaking with Serafina?" a deep professional voice asked. "This is she," I answered, frowning. "My name is Harrison Sterling. I'm a senior partner at Sterling and Associates in New York. I'm calling with some very difficult news regarding your uncle, Mr. Elias. I'm so sorry to inform you that he passed away peacefully in his sleep last night." The kitchen seemed to tilt. The polished quartz countertops blurred. Uncle Elias, the eccentric, quiet man who lived in a modest brownstone in Harlem. When my own parents had kicked me out for dropping out of college to pursue my culinary and consulting dreams, Elias was the only one who called. He was the that sent me handwritten letters telling me I had a brilliant mind. He remembered my children's birthdays. He was the only link I had left to unconditional family love. I gripped the edge of the kitchen island, forcing myself to breathe. "What happened?" I managed to ask, my voice cracking. "It was heart failure," Mr. Sterling explained gently. "It was sudden, but he did not suffer." "Serafina, I need to impress upon you the urgency of the situation. I am the executive of his estate. There are pressing legal matters that require your immediate physical presence in Manhattan. Can you be on a flight tomorrow morning?" Legal matters. I assumed Elias had left behind a few personal effects. Maybe some modest savings and a mountain of funeral expenses I would somehow have to cover. "Of course," I told the lawyer, wiping a tear from my cheek. "I'll book a flight right now and emailed you my itinerary." I hung up the phone just as Marcus walked into the kitchen. He was fastening his silver cufflinks, looking far too pleased with himself. He stopped when he saw my wet face and the phone clutched in my hand. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, sounding more annoyed than concerned. "Uncle Elias died," I whispered, staring at the marble floor. "I just got a call from his lawyer in New York. He passed away last night. I need to fly out tomorrow morning to handle his arrangements." Marcus dropped his hands to his sides and let out a long, exaggerated sigh. He looked up at the ceiling as if asking the universe why he had to deal with such trivial annoyances. "Elias," Marcus repeated, his tone dripping with absolute disdain. I snapped my head up, the grief momentarily eclipsed by a surge of pure, blinding anger. "He's my uncle, Marcus. He's my blood. He was the only person in my family who ever treated me with basic human decency." Marcus scoffed, walking over to the espresso machine and pouring himself a shot. "Basic human decency doesn't pay the bills. Serafina, do you have any idea what a last-minute flight to LaGuardia costs right now? You're talking about blowing $600 or $700 plus hotel expenses and whatever debts that old man left behind. We are not a charity. I am not funding a grief vacation for you to go mourn some broke recluse who contributed absolutely nothing to society." The sheer cruelty of his words was staggering even for him. He had just stolen $50,000 from our home's equity to buy a luxury penthouse for his mistress. Yet, he was lecturing me about the cost of a plane ticket to bury my only caring relative. "I'm not asking you to fund it," I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerously icy register. "I'll use the money from my consulting accounts." "I am going, Marcus. That is not a negotiation." Marcus slammed his espresso cup down on the counter. The sharp crack echoed in the silent kitchen. He pointed a rigid finger at me. "Listen, Tommy, you are burning through capital that belongs to this household. You want to waste your hobby money on a funeral for a Harlem squatter? Fine, go. But don't expect me to cover the difference when your account runs dry next month." And you had better have childcare arranged, because I am not canceling my executive meetings to look after Leo and Zuri while you play grieving niece in New York." He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out of the kitchen, the heavy front door slamming shut behind him. I stood alone in the silence, my chest heaving, the tears instantly drying on my cheeks. He wanted to talk about capital. He wanted to talk about dead weight and wasted money. He had no idea that his arrogant, dismissive attitude was sealing his own fate. I pulled out my laptop and booked the first flight to New York for the following morning. I went upstairs to our master bedroom and pulled a small carry-on suitcase from the top shelf of the closet. As I folded my black dresses and placed them inside, my mind raced with memories of Uncle Elias. I remembered the worn leather of his favorite armchair, the smell of peppermint and old paper that always followed him. He never bragged. He never wore designer suits or drove imported cars like Marcus. Elias wore simple tweed jackets and took the subway. He sent me antique books when I started my business, and always told me that true wealth was measured by the peace in your spirit, not the digits in your bank account. Marcus couldn't comprehend a man like Elias. Marcus only understood leverage, status, and exploitation. I zipped the suitcase shut, my resolve hardening into solid steel. Marcus thought he had me completely backed into a corner. He thought his secret real estate purchase with Sarah was safe behind his passwords and my supposed ignorance. He believed my trip to New York was just a pathetic waste of funds. Let him think that. Let him sit in his glass office in Atlanta, completely convinced of his own supremacy. I was going to honor my uncle, and then I was going to come back to dismantle my husband's entire world. The next morning, I kissed Leo and Zuri goodbye, leaving them in the capable hands of my neighbor, a retired teacher who adored them. I took a rideshare to the airport, staring out the window at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. My phone buzzed once. A text from Marcus. It read, "Don't expect me to pick you up when you get back. Get a cab." I didn't reply. I just turned my phone off, walked through the security gates, and boarded my flight to New York. The wheels lifted off the tarmac, carrying me away from the toxic, suffocating prison my home had become. I looked out the small airplane window as we broke through the cloud layer. I was flying toward grief. But for the first time in 7 years, I also felt an undeniable electric surge of freedom. I thought I was just going to Manhattan to sign a few release forms and clean out a dusty apartment. I was completely unprepared for the reality that was waiting for me at the law firm. I stepped out of the airplane as a battered housewife, but I was about to land in New York as a completely different entity. The taxi dropped me off on Park Avenue, directly in front of a towering glass structure that screamed generational wealth. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring up at the polished facade. Marcus had scoffed at my trip, convinced I was traveling to some dusty storefront to settle the debts of a neighborhood squatter. Instead, I walked through revolving glass doors into a lobby lined with imported Italian marble. A concierge in a bespoke suit checked my ID and escorted me to a restricted key-card-only private elevator. The door slid shut, and I ascended to the 60th floor. The air pressure popped in my ears. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into the sprawling, immaculate reception area of Sterling and Associates. The walls were lined with original modern art, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, unobstructed view of Central Park. A receptionist greeted me by name with profound respect and immediately guided me into a massive corner conference room. Harrison Sterling was already waiting. He was a distinguished older gentleman, with silver hair and the kind of quiet, commanding presence that comes from managing billions of dollars. He didn't treat me like a dependent housewife. He stood up immediately, buttoned his suit jacket, and offered me a warm, firm handshake. "Please sit, Serafina," Harrison said kindly, gesturing to a plush leather chair across from him. "I know this has been a whirlwind for you. Elias spoke of you constantly. You were the absolute light of his life." I sat down, clasping my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I just want to understand what needs to be done. Uncle Elias lived a very simple life, so I'm assuming there's a small life insurance policy on the deed to his brownstone. I'm prepared to take care of the funeral expenses. Harrison looked at me with a soft, knowing smile. He reached across the polished mahogany table and slid a thick leather-bound portfolio toward me. Your uncle lived simply, Serafina. But that was a deliberate choice, not a circumstance, Harrison explained, his voice steady and serious. Elias despised the garish, superficial trappings of modern wealth. He found it vulgar, but make no mistake, he was an absolute master at acquiring it. During the real estate crashes of the 70s and 80s, while everyone else was fleeing the city, your uncle was buying. He acquired entire city blocks through anonymous holding companies. He was a ghost titan in the New York real estate market. My heart stopped in my chest. I stared at the closed leather portfolio. What are you saying? I'm saying you are his sole heir, Harrison replied. And Elias didn't just leave you a brownstone. He opened the portfolio and flipped to the first page. It was a certified financial summary. My eyes dropped to the bottom line and the numbers swam before my vision. I blinked hard, but the digits remained exactly the same. Held in various offshore and domestic high-yield accounts was $30 million in liquid cash. I stopped breathing. My mind flashed to Marcus, screaming at me in our kitchen, veins bulging in his neck over a $140 grocery bill. I thought of Sarah standing on my patio, in her tight white dress, loudly declaring that I would never belong in a wealthy neighborhood without my husband carrying my dead weight. I was currently staring at more cash than Marcus and his entire executive board would see in their lifetimes. Turn the page, Serafina, Harrison instructed quietly. I turned the heavy parchment page. The next section outlined a massive real estate portfolio. There were luxury residential complexes in Brooklyn and Queens, generating millions in passive rental income. But the crown jewel of the estate was listed at the top. It was a 6-story commercial skyscraper located in the beating heart of Midtown Manhattan. This is where the situation becomes complex, Harrison continued, leaning forward and steepling his hands on the table. Elias didn't just leave you a pile of money to spend. He left you an active, aggressive corporate empire. You are now the sole managing director of the Elias Trust. The board of directors is awaiting your directives. The property management firms report directly to you. This wealth comes with the enormous responsibility of running an empire. Panic and adrenaline surged through my veins. I'm a crisis management consultant, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I fix PR disasters. I don't know how to run a commercial real estate empire. Elias knew exactly what you do, Harris countered smoothly. He chose you because he watched you build a business from your kitchen table while raising 2 children. He saw your strategic mind. He left a personal letter for you, and in it he wrote that you have the grit of a lioness, but you have forgotten your own strength. He wanted this inheritance to remind you that you answer to no one. You have my firm at your complete disposal to handle the legal logistics, but make no mistake, you are the boss now. The enormous weight of the responsibility settled on my shoulders, heavy but incredibly stabilizing. I was no longer a victim. I was a CEO. Let's take a look at the tenant roster for the Midtown skyscraper, Harrison suggested, tapping a manicured finger on the 3rd page of the portfolio. This property alone generates your highest margins. We hold the lease agreements for some of the most lucrative corporate entities on the East Coast. I scanned the list of high-profile law firms, international tech conglomerates, and elite marketing agencies renting our premium office space. Suddenly, my eyes locked on a specific corporate name listed on the 42nd floor. It was the exact financial group where Marcus worked as a senior executive, his firm's headquarters, the place he pined in his bespoke suits. Feeling like the king of the world, my heart began to beat with a frantic, dangerous rhythm. I turned to the next page, which detailed the trust's commercial holdings in the Southeast. There, listed under a premium commercial complex in downtown Atlanta, was SRY LLC. Sarah's boutique real estate brokerage rented its office space inside my property. The air in the room felt electric. My uncle had not only left me unimaginable wealth, He had literally handed me the ground on which my enemies stood. I owned the building where Marcus built his arrogant career. I owned the office building in Atlanta, where Sarah operated her fake, glamorous life. I was their ultimate landlord. The ones stealing from my children to buy their secret love nest were pocket change compared to the empire I now controlled. Harrison watched my face closely, his experienced eyes catching the sharp, undeniable shift in my demeanor. "You're overwhelmed, Serafina. We can take a break if you need a moment to process this." I looked up from the portfolio, turning my gaze to the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the vast Manhattan skyline. I thought of the divorce papers waiting in Sarah's hands. I thought of the postnuptial agreement Marcus was undoubtedly drafting to leave me destitute. I thought of the pure, unadulterated terror they expected me to feel. I slowly closed the leather portfolio and slid it back to the center of the table. I looked Harrison directly in the eye, my posture perfectly straight, my voice ringing with a cold, terrifying authority. "I'm not overwhelmed, Mr. Sterling. In fact, I've never seen things more clearly in my entire life. Please inform the board that I am assuming full control, effective immediately. We have some commercial lease agreements to review." Harrison Sterling didn't blink at my sudden change in tone. Instead, a slow, deeply approving smile spread across his weathered face. He looked like a man who had just watched a prophecy come true. He reached for the polished silver intercom, resting on the edge of his massive desk, and pressed a single button. He requested the commercial lease files for the 42nd floor in New York and the executive suites in the Atlanta complex. Within minutes, 2 junior associates entered the conference room carrying thick, heavy banker's boxes filled with meticulously organized legal documents. Uncle Elias was old school, Harrison explained as the associates silently exited the room. He demanded physical hard copies of every signature, every addendum, and every financial disclosure from his commercial tenants. He wanted to see the ink. I pulled the first heavy folder toward me. It contained the master lease agreement for the global financial conglomerate, where Marcus served as a senior executive. My husband pranced through life, believing he was a kingmaker, because he occupied a corner office on that 42nd floor. As I flipped through the crisp pages, a beautiful, devastating truth revealed itself. The corporation was currently in the middle of a highly contentious and incredibly vulnerable lease renewal negotiation. Their current 10-year lease was scheduled to expire in less than 4 months. According to the internal memos Elias had kept, the CEO of Marcus's firm had been practically begging the trust for a favorable extension. The building was a historic landmark, a symbol of absolute prestige in the financial sector. Relocating their headquarters would cost the firm tens of millions of dollars, disrupt their operations, and send a massive red flag to their shareholders. My eyes traced the signature of Marcus's CEO at the bottom of the original contract. The man who dictated my husband's salary, the man Marcus both worshipped and feared, was currently at the complete mercy of the Elias Trust. He was at my mercy. If I chose to terminate their lease or raise the rent to an astronomical figure, the resulting corporate chaos would inevitably lead to massive layoffs. Marcus could lose his prestigious job with a single snap of my fingers. I was no longer just his wife. I was the silent, invisible force that controlled the very ground his entire career stood on. I gently closed that folder and reached for the second one. SRY LLC, Sarah's Boutique Brokerage. I opened the file and immediately noticed a stark difference in the paperwork. Sarah did not have a standard 10-year corporate lease. Because her business was a relatively new, high-risk venture, the property management firm had only approved her for a month-to-month trial lease. Furthermore, Elias required all his smaller commercial tenants to sign a strict morality and ethical business conduct clause. It was a standard provision designed to protect the prestigious reputation of his buildings from shady operators. I scanned the accounting ledgers attached to the back of her file. A sharp, cold laugh escaped my lips. Sarah, the woman who pined across my backyard in designer dresses, mocking my financial dependency, was currently 60 days behind on her office rent. She had been dodging the property manager's phone calls for weeks, racking up late fees and penalty notices. Her glamorous, untouchable lifestyle was a complete illusion, financed by maxed-out credit cards and stolen money. She was literally facing eviction from her commercial space, and now I was the landlord holding her eviction notice. The silence in the grand conference room grew heavy and profound. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting flat on the leather-bound folders. It felt as if a cinematic camera were slowly zooming in on my face, capturing the exact moment the scared, battered housewife completely evaporated, leaving behind a cold, calculating predator. I felt a physiological shift deep in my bones. The anxiety that had plagued me for 7 years, the constant suffocating fear of not being good enough, vanished completely. I had them by the throat. Marcus and Sarah thought they were playing a brilliant game of chess against a blindfolded opponent, completely unaware that I actually owned the entire board. "Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice soft but laced with an undeniable authority, "I need you to execute a strict non-disclosure agreement for every single employee at this firm who knows about my inheritance. I want a complete gag order, no public announcements about my uncle's passing, no press releases about the transfer of the estate to the outside world, and specifically to the tenants of that building. The Elias Trust remains exactly as it was yesterday, business as usual." Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He watched me with a mixture of respect and intense curiosity. "May I ask what your strategy is, Serafina? You have the power to liquidate these tenants today if you wish." I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my simple black dress. "If I act today, they'll just scurry off to find a new host to leech off of. I don't want to just inconvenience them, Mr. Sterling. I'm going to let them dig their own graves. My husband is currently drafting a post-nuptial agreement designed to leave me destitute. His mistress is actively helping him hide the marital assets they've stolen from my children. I want them to feel supremely, absolutely confident until the precise second I dropped the guillotine." Harrison nodded slowly, a fierce glint in his experienced eyes. "Your uncle always said that patience was the ultimate weapon of the wealthy. We will lock the estate down tight. Not a whisper of your name will reach Atlanta until you give the order." I thanked him, picked up my small handbag, and walked out of the conference room. I rode the private elevator back down to the lobby. The descent felt entirely different from the ride up. I stepped out onto the bustling Manhattan pavement, the chaotic energy of the city washing over me. I hailed a cab back to LaGuardia Airport. I was flying back to Georgia to re-enter the suffocating cage of my marriage. I knew exactly what was waiting for me. Marcus would be cruel, dismissive, and demanding. Sarah continued to send her subtle, toxic jabs. They would treat me like a disposable burden, fully believing their secret penthouse and their stolen funds were perfectly safe. But I was no longer fighting for survival. I was simply returning to Atlanta to play my part in their grand illusion, waiting patiently in the shadows until the perfect moment came to shatter their entire world. The yellow cab pulled up to the curb of my Atlanta home exactly 24 hours after I had left. The house looked perfectly normal, a sprawling brick estate under the warm afternoon sun, but walking toward the front door felt like stepping onto a movie set. I was no longer the desperate woman who lived here. I was an actress playing a part, and the script called for absolute unwavering submission. I unlocked the front door and dragged my small suitcase into the foyer. The house was silent. Leo and Zuri were still at school. Marcus was sitting in the formal living room with a glass of expensive whiskey resting on the end table beside him. He didn't stand up to greet me. He didn't ask how my uncle's funeral was or how I was doing. He just glanced at his gold Rolex and took a slow sip of his drink. "You took your time," he said, his voice echoing in the large, empty room. "I hope you found whatever closure you needed in that run-down apartment. We have real business to deal with today." I kept my eyes intentionally downcast, hunching my shoulders to project pure emotional exhaustion. "It was a modest service," I replied quietly, letting my voice waver just enough to sound authentic. "I'm just tired, Marcus. He stood up and walked over to the heavy glass coffee table, picking up a thick stack of legal documents. He didn't offer me a hug or a glass of water. Instead, he dropped the papers onto the kitchen island with a loud, authoritative thud. "Sit down, Serafina," he ordered. "We need to talk about asset protection." I walked to the kitchen island and pulled out a stool, wrapping my arms around myself as if for comfort. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the bold text on the first page. "It's a post-nuptial agreement," he said smoothly, leaning against the marble countertop and crossing his arms. He adopted the same condescending tone he used to explain taxes to me. "My firm is going through a massive internal restructuring with the new executive responsibilities. My personal assets are suddenly exposed. If the company faces litigation, aggressive lawyers could come after this house and our joint accounts. I had my legal team draft this to separate our finances strictly on paper. It protects you and the kids from being collateral damage if my board gets sued." It was a brilliant, terrifyingly plausible lie. If I had been the woman I was 2 days ago, I might have believed him. I might have looked at him with deep gratitude, thinking my strong, capable husband was building a fortress to keep our fam safe. But the woman sitting on that stool knew the absolute truth. Marcus wasn't protecting our family from corporate litigation. He was legally severing my rights to our marital assets so he could throw me out on the street and move into a luxury penthouse with his brother's wife. "You want to separate our finances?" I asked, widening my eyes to feign anxiety. "Marcus, I barely make enough from my consulting to cover basic expenses. If you cut me off, how am I supposed to manage?" He let out a short, condescending sigh and reached out to pat my hand. It was the physical equivalent of a participation trophy. "Don't panic, Serafina. Nothing changes in our day-to-day life. I'll still pay the mortgage. I'll still fund the household account. This is just a piece of paper for the government. It simply establishes that any assets or debts I acquire in my name belong solely to me, and what you acquire belongs to you. It's a corporate shield. That's all." I looked down at the document, tracing the edge of the paper with my fingertip. He was deliberately trying to block my access to our home's equity and absolve Clear's throat, me, of any right to his future wealth, completely unaware that his future wealth hinged entirely on my mercy. "I'm just so overwhelmed with Uncle Elias passing," I whispered, looking up at him with fabricated tears shining in my eyes. "Legal documents scare me, Marcus. Can I just read it over tonight before I sign anything?" Marcus rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed by the delay, but his massive ego interpreted my hesitation as simple female incompetence. "Fine," he snapped, turning away to grab his briefcase. "Read it tonight, but I need your signature tomorrow morning. My lawyers are waiting, and I don't have time to hold your hand through a standard corporate procedure." The second his car pulled out of the driveway, the scared housewife act instantly evaporated. I grabbed the postnup, marched straight into my home office, and locked the door. I scanned every page of his lawyer's draft and sent the encrypted files straight to Harrison Sterling in New York. Within an hour, Harrison and his team of elite corporate sharks had dissected Marcus' pathetic little trap. The document was ruthlessly designed to leave me with absolutely nothing. But Harrison pointed out a fatal flaw in Marcus's strategy, because Marcus was trying to fast-track this without raising my suspicions. He had used a standard legal template for several of the asset forfeit clauses. "We are going to rewrite page 7 and page 9, Harrison told me over the phone, his voice vibrating with professional glee. "We will keep the exact same font, the same margins, and the same legal ease. But we are going to alter the language regarding financial liability and undisclosed debts." For the next 3 hours, we meticulously crafted the ultimate poison pill. We inserted a brilliantly disguised clause, stating that any debt secretly acquired against the primary marital residence would become the sole undisputed liability of the party who initiated the loan. We also added a morality and fraud stipulation buried deep within the legal definitions of asset separation. It essentially stated that if either party concealed significant financial transactions or engaged in the diversion of marital funds for non-marital purposes, they automatically forfeited their right to contest any solely owned property of the other spouse. It was a legal masterpiece. If Marcus signed it, he would be legally binding himself to the entire $50,000 debt he had stolen from our home's equity, while simultaneously waiving any future right to lay claim to the $30 million empire I had just inherited. I printed the altered pages on my office printer, carefully aligning them with the rest of the stack so they looked completely untouched. I bound them together with the same heavy metal staple Marcus's lawyer had used. The next morning, the trap was set. Marcus was running late. He was frantically adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror, cursing at his phone because he was about to miss a morning conference call. This was the exact moment of vulnerability I had anticipated. Arrogant men never read the fine print when they believe they've already won the game. I walked into the hauling the thick stack of papers and a black ink pen. I kept my posture submissive and my voice just shaky enough to sell the illusion. I read it, Marcus, I said quietly, holding the documents out to him. I still don't understand all the legal words, but I trust you. If you say this keeps the kids safe, then I believe you. He snatched the papers from my hands with a triumphant, greedy smile. He didn't flip to page 7, he didn't check the clauses on page 9. He just went straight to the signature page at the end, completely consumed by his own brilliant deception. He pulled a gold fountain pen from his chest pocket and scrolled his authoritative signature on the bottom line. I took the pen from his hand and signed my name right next to his, finalizing the single most devastating legal contract of his entire life. There, Marcus said, tapping the papers against the console table to straighten them before stuffing them into his leather briefcase. See, that wasn't so hard. You worried too much, Serafina. Just let the men handle the heavy lifting. He leaned in, kissed my forehead with a cold clinical precision, and hurried out the front door. I stood in the silent foyer, watching his luxury car speed down the street through the glass sidelights. The pure, intoxicating thrill of victory coursed through my veins. He thought he had just secured his wealthy, glamorous future with Sarah. He thought he had just legally discarded his dead weight. He had no idea he had just signed his own financial death warrant and handed me the executioner's axe. The silent battle of wits was over, and I had won. Now it was time to systematically destroy the ground he walked on. The heavy mahogany front door clicked shut. I stood in the silent foyer, listening to the roar of his luxury car's engine fade down the street. The moment the sound vanished completely, I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a direct line to New York. Harrison Sterling answered on the first ring, his tone professional, sharp, and ready for instruction. I walked into the spacious living room, running my hand along the back of the custom leather sofa Marcus so proudly claimed as his own. We need to establish a corporate entity immediately, I told the lawyer. I want a shell company buried under layers of anonymity so deep no forensic accountant in Georgia can trace it back to me. Use a Cheyenne, Wyoming address. Make it impenetrable. Harrison chuckled, the sound rich with anticipation. Consider the ink already drying. Serafina, what's the objective of our first acquisition? I explained the $50,000 home equity line of credit Marcus had secretly extracted from our property to fund his mistress. I gave Harrison the name of the local bank. Marcus used a mid-sized regional lender that the Elias Trust likely dwarfed in daily operational cash. I don't just want to pay off his illicit loan, I clarified, my voice echoing slightly against the high ceilings. I want to buy the actual debt. I want my new company to purchase the primary mortgage and the secondary line of credit from his bank. I want to own the promissory note on this house. Harrison understood the assignment perfectly. He explained that banks sell off debt portfolios constantly, especially when a massive Manhattan trust firm offers a premium all-cash buyout above market value. The regional lender would be thrilled to offload a residential mortgage for an immediate lucrative payout. The transaction could move quickly behind ironclad corporate walls. Within 48 hours, A newly created entity named Obsidian Holdings LLC had successfully acquired the primary mortgage and the secondary equity line of credit attached to my Atlanta address. I received the digital confirmation email while I was standing at the kitchen island spreading peanut butter on bread for Leo and Zuri. I stared at the PDF contract on my phone screen. The legal reality was breathtakingly simple. Marcus was now legally obligated to make his monthly mortgage payments directly to a corporate server that would automatically funnel every single cent directly into my private offshore accounts. I was no longer just his spurned wife. I was his bank. If he missed a single payment, which he would inevitably do once his career and his secret penthouse imploded, I held the absolute legal authority to foreclose and seize the property. That evening, Marcus came home radiating a level of arrogance that was almost unbearable. He tossed his briefcase on the counter and loosened his silk tie, striding through the house with the swagger of an undisputed conqueror. He poured himself a glass of expensive bourbon, completely oblivious to the fact that the floor beneath his expensive Italian shoes no longer belonged to him. "Make sure the landscaping crew trims the hedges near the pool this weekend," he ordered, gesturing with his glass toward the backyard. "I noticed some overgrowth yesterday. We need to maintain the property value. This house is my biggest asset, Serafina, and I expect you to manage its upkeep properly since you're home all day with nothing else to do." I turned to face him, wiping my hands on a dish towel. A warm, perfectly pleasant smile spread across my face. "Of course, Marcus. I'll make sure your asset is beautifully maintained." He took a sip of his whiskey, looking around the room with intense pride. "You need to understand how leverage works in the real world," he lectured, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I carry the financial weight so you can enjoy the security of these walls. Every brick in here represents my capital, my hard work, and my corporate standing. I expect gratitude for that." I nodded obediently, playing the submissive, dependent wife to absolute perfection. "Your capital is incredibly impressive," I told him, keeping my tone soft and admiring. "I'm so grateful to know exactly who owns this house," he smirked, pleased with my complete submission. He thought he had successfully manipulated a naive woman into signing away her rights. He thought his freshly executed post-nuptial agreement was an impenetrable shield. He had no idea he was just a renter who hadn't yet received his eviction notice. He was lecturing his ultimate creditor about leverage, completely unaware that the financial noose was already tight around his neck. "I'm going to be traveling a lot more over the next few weeks," he added casually, setting his empty glass in the sink. "Corporate expansion. Big moves are happening at the firm, and I need to be available for late-night strategy sessions. I need you to be fully focused on the kids so I can focus on securing our future." He meant Sarah. He meant finalizing the purchase of their luxury penthouse at the Susebrin. He was giving himself a preemptive alibi for the nights he planned to spend entirely in her bed. "You take all the time you need for your strategy sessions," I replied smoothly. "The kids and I will be right here. You just focus on closing your deals." He went upstairs to shower, whistling a cheerful tune, completely convinced of his own untouchable supremacy. I watched him go, marveling at how easy it was to deceive a man who refused to look closely at anything other than his own reflection. I was wiping down the pristine quartz countertops when my phone vibrated in my apron pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from my daughter's gymnastics coach or a reminder for a dentist appointment. Instead, an iMessage notification glowed on the screen from an unsaved number, but I didn't need a contact name to know exactly who was texting me. The message read, "I hear the rental market in the suburbs is brutal this time of year. You might want to start packing up your little home office, Serafina. Marcus can't carry a freeloader forever." It was Sarah. She just couldn't resist gloating. She was practically vibrating with the need to rub her perceived victory in my face. She wanted me to panic. She wanted me to cry and beg Marcus to explain the cryptic message. She wanted to accelerate the timeline of my destruction because she was impatient to clear her terror territory. I stared at the glowing screen, the sheer audacity of her taunt igniting a cold, dark thrill in my chest. She was playing a dangerous game with a woman she fundamentally did not understand. I didn't reply to the message. I just locked my phone, tossed it on the counter, and let out a soft, genuine laugh. The trap was completely set, the bait had been taken, and the rats were eagerly marching straight into the cage. I left the phone resting on the cool marble countertop and walked over to the stove to boil water for tea. Sarah wanted a frantic, emotional reaction. She desperately craved the image of me pacing the kitchen floor in a tearful panic, trying to decode her vicious little riddle. She thrived on creating chaos and feeding on the emotional debris of people she deemed her inferiors. As a white woman who had married into a prominent, wealthy African American family, Sarah had always carried a bizarre and deep-seated insecurity. She overcompensated by constantly trying to prove she was the most sophisticated, financially dominant woman in our entire extended network. Her text message wasn't just a taunt, it was a pathetic attempt to assert her dominance, to remind me that she currently held the keys to my husband's future while I was supposedly being tossed to the curb. But the scared, dependent woman she was trying to break no longer lived at this address. I poured hot water over loose-leaf chamomile, watching as the water slowly turned a rich golden amber against the pristine white ceramic of my favorite mug. I inhaled the calming floral scent and took a slow, deliberate sip. The warmth spread through my chest, chasing away any lingering shadows of doubt or heartbreak. A week ago, a message like that would have sent me into a devastating spiral of anxiety. I would have questioned my worth, my marriage, and my ability to keep a roof over my children's heads. Today, the text message simply served as a written confirmation of her guilt and a magnificent validation of my strategy. I carried my mug out of the kitchen and into the adjacent family room. Leo and Zuri were sprawled on the plush cream-colored rug, deeply engrossed in a complex game of building blocks. Leo was meticulously stacking wooden squares to create a towering fortress, while Zuri strategically placed toy soldiers around the perimeter. I stood quietly in the doorway, letting the profound peace of the moment wash over me. Marcus was perfectly willing to trade his children's home, their stability, and their innocent trust for a glass box in the sky, with a woman who held nothing but contempt for their mother. He was willing to disrupt their schools, their friendships, and their sense of basic security just to stroke his own massive, fragile ego. He looked at his children and saw financial obligations. I looked at them and saw my entire world. Watching them now, I felt an impenetrable wall of protection surrounding us. I was no longer a helpless passenger in Marcus's destructive runaway vehicle. I was the one driving, and I had just locked all the doors from the inside. I set my tea down on a slate coaster and pulled my laptop from the end table. It was time to pull the hidden tripwire we had so carefully laid. I opened the encrypted portal that connected me directly to Sterling and Associates in New York. Harrison had left a pending legal document in my secure inbox, awaiting my final executive authorization. By arrogantly signing the doctored post-nuptial agreement that morning, Marcus had officially and illegally claimed sole individual liability for the $50,000 home equity line of credit. He thought he was cleverly walling off my access to his future wealth. He didn't realize he was actually walling himself off from any financial protection. The brilliant fine print Harrison and I had buried on page 9 explicitly stated that any unilateral separation of marital debt instantly triggered an automatic acceleration clause with the primary mortgage holder. Since my shell company, Obsidian Holdings LLC, now owned that specific debt portfolio, the creditor had the absolute legal right to demand immediate full repayment of the loan balance due to a fundamental change in the borrower's asset structure. Marcus had just drained his available liquid cash to pay Sarah's earnest money for their luxury penthouse. He was financially overextended, depending heavily on his upcoming quarterly corporate bonus to stay afloat. A sudden, legally binding demand for $50,000 in cash, plus immediate penalty fees, would absolutely his cash flow. If he failed to produce the funds within 48 hours of official notification, Obsidian Holdings would possess the legal grounds to initiate a swift foreclosure on his primary asset, effectively seizing the house he loved to brag about. I opened a new message window and began to type a short, clear directive to Harrison. The ink is dry on the postnup. Marcus has successfully isolated his liabilities just as we planned. Please activate the acceleration clause on the HESILOC immediately. Issue the notice of default and demand directly to his private office at the financial firm tomorrow morning. Do not send it to the house. Let the corporate mailroom sign for it and let it sit on his mahogany desk where his colleagues can see the certified bank seals. Sending the notice directly to his corporate headquarters was a very calculated move. Marcus built his entire identity around being the smartest, most untouchable executive on the 42nd floor. Receiving a massive financial default notice in his sanctuary of power would shatter his flawless, professional facade. He would be forced to open a foreclosure threat while sitting in the very building I secretly owned. The poetic justice of the location was almost too delicious to ignore. I hit send. The screen displayed a bright green checkmark, signaling that the legal machinery was already in motion. There was no reversing the process. I closed the laptop, picked up my tea, and took another slow sip, leaning back against the comfortable sofa cushions. Just then, Zuri let out a loud giggle as she rolled a wooden ball across the carpet, causing Leo's meticulously built block tower to come crashing down in a heap of scattered pieces. I smiled, watching the colorful wooden blocks scatter across the floor without a single ounce of regret. Rebuilding always requires a little strategic destruction. First, the invisible iron noose I had so carefully woven around my husband's neck finally tightened. All I had to do now was attend my brother-in-law's birthday dinner and wait for Marcus to confidently walk himself straight off the cliff. The private dining room at one of Buckhead's most exclusive steakhouse was suffocatingly opulent. Heavy velvet curtains framed the floor-to-ceiling windows, and a massive crystal chandelier cast a warm golden glow over the long mahogany table. We were gathered to celebrate David's 38th birthday, but within 5 minutes of arriving, it became abundantly clear that the evening was actually a dedicated showcase for Marcus and Sarah to flaunt their perceived superiority. I sat silently beside my husband in a simple but elegant navy silk dress, playing my part to absolute perfection. Marcus was in his element. He presided over the center of the table, loudly ordering 1,000 bottles of imported red wine and waving away the sommelier with the casual arrogance of a man who believed his bank account was limitless. Across from us sat David, a genuinely decent but tragically oblivious man, and Sarah, who was practically vibrating with a toxic, nervous energy. Sarah had chosen to wear a skin-tight metallic silver dress that caught the light from the chandelier every time she moved. She spent the first course ensuring every single guest at the table knew exactly how much her diamond tennis bracelet cost. But the real performance began just as the waiters cleared our appetizer plates. Marcus stood up, tapping his silver fork against his crystal wine glass to command the entire room's attention. The chatter instantly died down. He smoothed the front of his bespoke suit jacket and looked at his older brother with a magnanimous, overly practiced smile. "David, we've been through a lot together," Marcus projected, his voice carrying so even the waitstaff hovering by the door could hear him. "You've always been a solid brother, a good husband to Sarah, and a steady guy. But you know me, I'm not one for standard birthday cards. I believe when you reach a certain echelon of success, you have an obligation to bring your family along with you." Marcus reached into his breast pocket and produced a heavy, unmistakable green velvet box. He slid it across the polished mahogany table. David looked genuinely shocked as he opened the lid. Inside was a gleaming brand-new Rolex Daytona. Several guests gasped. It was a watch that easily retailed for over $30,000, the kind of status symbol that required waiting lists and deep corporate connections. David was speechless, staring at the watch as if it might bite him. Marcus, he stammered, his face flushing. This is too much. I can't accept this. It's insane nonsense. Marcus boomed, waving his hand dismissively. I had a phenomenal quarter at the firm. The portfolio returns were massive. Wear it in good health, David. Consider it a testament to the kind of capital our family is capable of generating. I kept my hands carefully folded in my lap, maintaining a pleasant, utterly serene smile. My husband was giving away $30,000 watches to feed his own God complex, blissfully unaware that he had funded this grand gesture with a line of credit that was currently imploding. He was playing the part of a billionaire philanthropist while sitting on a mountain of debt that I now legally owned. The irony was so rich and intoxicating, I almost wanted to give him a round of applause. Sarah, however, refused to let Marcus hold the spotlight for more than 5 minutes. The moment David had secured the heavy gold watch on his wrist, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table and clasping her hands together. Speaking of massive success, Sarah announced, her sharp voice cutting through the lingering murmurs of the guests. I have a little celebration of my own to share tonight. I just closed on a stunning new property this afternoon. I didn't want to steal David's thunder, but I have officially secured a luxury penthouse at the Soberin. A chorus of impressed congratulations erupted around the table. The Sober was legendary in Atlanta, an architectural masterpiece reserved exclusively for the ultra-wealthy. I looked directly at Marcus. He met my gaze and offered a tight congratulatory nod toward his sister-in-law, completely concealing the fact that they had just purchased their secret love nest using the stolen equity from my children's home. It's a massive milestone, Sarah continued, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder and looking directly at me. The penthouse has private elevator access, floor-to-ceiling, skyline views, and a custom marble kitchen. It just goes to show what happens when a woman really applies herself and builds her own empire, instead of waiting for a man to give her an allowance. The tension at the table instantly ratcheted up. The air grew thick and uncomfortable as several family members shifted in their seats. Keenly aware of the blatant, targeted insult, everyone in that room knew I worked from home. Everyone knew Marcus controlled our finances. Sarah wasn't just bragging, she was publicly loading a shotgun and pointing it directly at my chest. You know, I just have so much respect for the modern economy. Sarah pressed on, her icy blue eyes locked on mine with vicious intent. In today's world, a successful man needs a true partner. He needs an equal. He needs a woman who understands real estate profit margins and the corporate grind. I look at these women who just sit at home, doing a little bit of laundry, answering a few casual emails, and draining their husband's resources. And honestly, I just feel pity. She took a slow sip of her red wine, never breaking eye contact. It must be exhausting for a man to carry dead weight around his neck, Sarah concluded, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. A woman who doesn't generate real capital is nothing more than a heavy burden, a leech. Really, it takes a very patient man to tolerate a wife who offers no return on investment. The silence that followed was deafening. David stared down at his plate, completely embarrassed, but too cowardly to stop his wife from verbally savaging his sister-in-law. I turned my head slightly to look at Marcus. My husband, the man who had sworn to protect me, was actually swirling his wine and chuckling quietly to himself. He was enjoying the show. He was actively encouraging his mistress to publicly humiliate his wife. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to burst into tears, throw my napkin on the table, and run out of the restaurant in a fit of hysterical, defeated shame. They wanted to prove to the entire room that I was emotionally unstable and wholly unworthy of Marcus's greatness. Instead, I reached out and picked up my crystal water glass. The ice clinked it softly against the tumbler. I took a calm, refreshing sip, letting the cool water wash away any lingering traces of anxiety. I set the glass back down on the white linen tablecloth with absolute precision. I looked at the gleaming Rolex on David's wrist, then the smug smile on Marcus's face, and finally the triumphant, venomous eyes of Sarah. They had no idea the cliff's edge was right beneath their feet. You are absolutely right, Sarah. I said, setting my crystal glass down with a soft but distinct clink that drew the attention of the entire table. A successful man does need a true partner. He needs a woman who genuinely understands profit margins and the corporate grind instead of someone who's just pretending to play the game while drowning in invisible debt. Sarah's smug smile faltered for a split second. She recovered quickly, jutting her chin out defensively and adjusting her posture to project confidence. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Serafina, but then again, I wouldn't expect someone who works from her kitchen table to understand commercial real estate or high acquisitions. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the heavy mahogany table. The private dining room had fallen into a pin-drop silence with every single guest hanging on my every word. I understand quite a bit about commercial real estate, I replied, my voice soft, conversational, and completely lethal. For example, I know that purchasing a luxury penthouse at the Soberon requires an incredibly strict financial vetting process. It's a very exclusive property. The board typically demands hard proof of liquid capital and verified income history. They frown heavily on buyers who leverage their purchases with shady high-interest secondary loans or undisclosed home equity lines of credit. It's just too risky for the partnership. A sudden acceleration clause from a primary creditor could leave a buyer completely paralyzed, facing swift foreclosure and total asset liquidation before they even get a chance to move in their designer furniture. The color rapidly drained from Sarah's face. The metallic silver of her dress suddenly looked harsh and unforgiving against her pale skin. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to Marcus in pure, unadulterated panic, silently asking him if I somehow knew the truth about the $50,000 he had stolen from my house to fund her earnest money deposit. And speaking of business empires, I continued smoothly, not giving her a chance to catch her breath or formulate a lie. I've always been fascinated by boutique brokerages. Take your firm, for example. It takes an enormous amount of overhead to maintain an illusion of extreme wealth. Renting prime executive office suites in downtown Atlanta requires massive monthly cash flow. I read a fascinating industry article recently about how a lot of these flashy boutique firms actually operate on precarious month-to-month trial leases because they lack the capital to secure long-term corporate backing. One missed payment, one ethics violation clause triggered by the commercial landlord, and the whole illusion comes crashing down overnight. The eviction notices just pile up, leaving the brokers completely locked out of their own glamorous offices. Sarah's jaw literally dropped. The crystal champagne flute in her hand trembled visibly, spilling a few drops of expensive wine onto the pristine white tablecloth. She looked absolutely terrified, stripped bare of all her arrogance in a matter of seconds. I had just effortlessly summarized her entire fraudulent existence, hinting at both her impending commercial eviction and the fragile, illegal financial scheme she had cooked up with my husband. David looked completely baffled by his wife's sudden silence, glancing back and forth between us, completely blind to the reality of the situation. Marcus slammed his hand flat on the table. The sudden violent noise echoed sharply off the velvet walls, causing several guests to jump in their seats. "That's enough, Serafina," Marcus barked, his voice laced with absolute fury. His polished corporate composure completely shattered. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Have you had too much wine? You're not making any sense, and you're embarrassing yourself. We're leaving now." He didn't wait for my reply or ask for my consent. He stormed around the table, grabbed my upper arm with an aggressive, bruising force, and practically dragged me out of the private dining room. I didn't resist or make a physical scene. I walked smoothly beside him, maintaining my perfect icy posture as he hauled me down the dimly lit corridor toward the private restrooms. He shoved me into a quiet alcove near a decorative marble fountain, glancing around frantically to make sure none of his colleagues or family members had followed us. His chest was heaving under his bespoke suit, his face flushed with barely contained rage. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed, pointing a rigid finger directly in my face. "Are you literally insane? You sit there and insult my brother's wife at his birthday. You start spouting absolute nonsense about real estate and corporate lease agreements like, you have any idea how the real world works? You are a stay-at-home mom who answers emails for small businesses. You know absolutely nothing about capital, asset leverage, or corporate vetting processes." I looked down at his accusing finger, then slowly met his furious gaze. I didn't shrink into the shadows. I didn't apologize or cower like the beautiful, financially dependent wife he expected me to be. "I know exactly how leverage works, Marcus," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly calm and terrifyingly even. "You are just trying to ruin the night because you're bitter and jealous," he spat, moving closer to try and physically intimidate me into silence. "Sarah is a licensed broker who closes massive deals and is making a name for herself. You are throwing a pathetic little tantrum because she correctly pointed out that you contribute nothing of real financial value to our household. You humiliated me in front of my brother and my professional colleagues. You embarrassed my family just because you can't handle the truth about your own lack of ambition." I looked at him, marveling at the sheer blinding depth of his delusion. He was standing in a blank, 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 blank blame to me, entering in a hallway, berating me for embarrassing his family, completely ignoring the massive betrayal he was orchestrating right under his own brother's nose. He was so consumed by his own arrogance that he couldn't see the massive hole in the ice right beneath his expensive shoes. "I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a vicious, threatening whisper. "You are going to go back into that dining room, you are going to apologize to Sarah and David, and then you are going to sit there silently for the rest of the night. If you ever disrespect my family or my career in public again, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" I looked at the man I had once loved, the man I had sacrificed my own corporate ambitions for, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold surgical precision. He wanted an apology. He wanted submission. "I understand perfectly, Marcus," I said quietly. "I understand exactly what kind of man you are, and I understand exactly what needs to be done." I turned and walked back down the velvet corridor with my head held high. I wasn't going to apologize. I was going to let him believe he had won this trivial hallway argument because the real destruction was already scheduled to arrive at his corporate office on Monday morning. The drive back to our gated community was shrouded in a suffocating, heavy silence. Marcus gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles mirrored the white lines on the highway. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the city lights blur past the window, feeling absolutely nothing for the man seething beside me. We pulled into the garage, the tires crunching against the pavement. He killed the engine, but neither of us made a move to open the door. He finally unbuckled his seatbelt, stepped out into the humid night air, and strode to the front door without waiting for me. I followed him inside, setting my handbag on the entryway console table. The babysitter had already put Leo and Zuri to bed and left a note on the kitchen counter. The house was perfectly silent, a serene backdrop for the execution he was about to attempt. Marcus didn't bother to take off his suit jacket. He turned to face me in the center of the grand foyer, his dark eyes completely stripped of the charismatic warmth he had shown his brother just hours before. "We're done, Serafina," he declared, his voice a flat hollow blade. "I am officially calling it. I am not spending another year of my prime tethered to a woman who actively tries to sabotage my family relationships and embarrass me in front of my peers." I stood by the staircase, resting my hand on the polished wooden banister. I didn't gasp. I didn't clutch my chest. I just waited for him to finish his rehearsed corporate termination speech. Upstairs, my children were sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that their father was standing in the foyer, eagerly dismantling our family unit just so he could finance a fantasy life with his brother's wife. "I'm initiating a formal separation," Marcus continued, pacing along the hardwood floor. "And since you clearly have no respect for the lifestyle I provide, you will no longer be allowed to enjoy it. You have exactly 3 days to pack your belongings and vacate these premises. By Monday evening, I want your keys on that countertop." 3 days, I repeated, keeping my tone perfectly neutral, letting him revel in the illusion of his absolute authority. 3 days, he confirmed, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. "And just so we're crystal clear on the new reality of your situation, I'm cutting off your access right now." He tapped the screen a few times, navigating to our banking app. "I am instantly canceling the household expense cards. You signed the postnup yesterday morning, which means you have absolutely no legal claim to my accounts, my assets, or this property. If you want to afford a moving truck, I suggest you start using whatever pennies you've saved from your little consulting hobby." He locked his phone and slid it back into his pocket, looking at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. "You brought this on yourself. You thought you could run your mouth at a high society dinner and I would just swallow it. You overplayed your hand, Serafina. Now you're going to learn how the real world works when you don't have a successful man financing your existence." He wanted me to break. He was practically vibrating with anticipation, waiting to see me shatter into a million desperate pieces. He wanted me to fall to my knees, beg for his forgiveness, and plead for a little more time so I wouldn't be homeless. He wanted to feel like a god issuing a harsh but necessary decree. I looked up at the high ceilings of the foyer, taking one slow, deep breath, and then I met his expectant face. "I understand, Marcus," I said quietly. "I'm not going to argue with you about this. If you want me gone by Monday, I'll be gone by Monday." Marcus's brow furrowed, his forehead wrinkling in deep confusion. My absolute lack of resistance disrupted his entire script. He had geared up for a massive, hysterical shouting match. But I was handing him a quiet, effortless victory. His massive ego quickly rationalized my behavior. He assumed the reality of my impending poverty had shocked me into total submission. "Good," he grunted, adjusting his collar, trying to regain his dominant posture. "Don't try to take anything that belongs to the house. I'll be checking the inventory. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. Have your things in boxes before the weekend is over." He turned and walked up the stairs, leaving me alone in the dim light of the entryway. I heard his heavy footsteps echo down the second-floor hall, followed by the sharp final slam of the guest bedroom door. The house fell, completely silent again. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, perfectly still, letting the absolute genius of his timeline wash over me. He wanted me out by Monday. Monday, the exact same day the corporate mailroom at his financial headquarters would be signing for a certified notice of default and demand from Obsidian Holdings LLC. The exact same day his CEO would discover Marcus was facing a catastrophic foreclosure due to illicit borrowing. The exact same day Sarah's commercial landlord would be terminating her trial lease for ethical violations. I slowly walked up the stairs, my hand gliding effortlessly along the banister. I didn't go to the master bedroom to cry into my pillows. I went straight to my massive walk-in closet and pulled a large, hard-sided suitcase from the top shelf. I laid it flat on the velvet ottoman in the center of the room and popped it open with a sharp, satisfying sound. I moved methodically, pulling flawless blouses, tailored trousers, and elegant dresses from their hangers. I folded them with absolute precision, placing them neatly in the suitcase. I wasn't packing to flee to a cheap motel. I was assembling my armor for a triumphant move to a luxury penthouse suite at a 5-star downtown hotel, a suite I had already booked using the unlimited corporate expense account attached to the Elias Trust. I would take Leo and Zuri there after Gusgul on Monday, shielding them completely from the fallout. I paused for a moment, my hands resting on the edge of the open suitcase. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror mounted on the closet door. My face was completely serene, utterly devoid of heartbreak. A slow, chilling smile pulled at the corners of my mouth, growing wider as I imagined the absolute devastation that awaited my husband at the start of the work week. Marcus thought he had just issued an eviction notice to a dependent housewife. He didn't know he had just set the timer on his own total annihilation. I closed the suitcase, snapped the latches shut, and packaged the hotel receipts and photos into a manila envelope, scheduling a private courier to deliver it directly to David's desk on Monday morning. The weekend passed in a whirlwind of quiet, meticulous preparation. By the time Monday afternoon arrived, the air in Atlanta was thick with humidity and the electric charge of impending destruction. I pulled into our exclusive gated community, the tires of my SUV humming softly against the familiar asphalt. In the back seat, Leo and Zuri were completely engrossed in their tablets. I had already arranged for a trusted private driver to meet us at the end of the block. He was waiting to take my children to the luxury hotel suite I had prepared, shielding them completely from the explosive fallout that was about to occur. I parked the car, kissed their foreheads, and closed the doors, leaving the air conditioning running. "Mommy will be right back," I promised them with a bright, reassuring smile. I turned and walked up the long concrete path alone. Every step I took brought the devastating timeline that had started just a few days earlier full circle. The scene unfolding in front of me was exactly as I had known it would be. Sarah's pristine white Range Rover was parked haphazardly near the driveway, an arrogant declaration of her presence. Marcus was standing on our porch, his arms crossed tightly over his navy suit. Sarah was at his side, her shoulder brushing against his, clutching a thick stack of manila folders. They looked down at me from their elevated position like a pair of monarchs preparing to banish a peasant. "It's not your front porch anymore, Serafina?" Sarah sneered, her voice cutting through the quiet suburban afternoon. She flung the heavy folders forward. They hit the concrete with a loud thud, sliding to reveal the bold black lettering at the top, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." Marcus didn't flinch. "Sign them," he demanded coldly. "I've already filed the preliminary paperwork. My lawyer fast-tracked the process. We're done." Sarah moved to the edge of the porch, her blue eyes narrowing with undisguised contempt. "Marcus is done carrying your dead weight," she spat. "You contribute absolutely nothing to this household. Pack your bags. There's no room for a leech in this house." A normal woman would have crumbled, would have dropped to her knees on the hard concrete, and begged the man she loved to explain his sudden cruelty. But I just looked down at the scattered divorce papers, then back up at my husband and his mistress. I felt a deep, radiant warmth blooming in the center of my chest. The corners of my mouth slowly curved upward. "Okay," I said quietly. Marcus's brow furrowed, his arrogant posture faltering for a split second. The absolute lack of panic in my voice disrupted his entire script. "What's so funny?" he snapped, his tone losing its corporate edge and bleeding into genuine frustration. I threw my head back and let out a bright, ringing laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that startled the birds in the nearby oak tree. I laughed because the sheer arrogance of their timing was going to make their downfall that much sweeter. "Actually," I said, tilting my head and locking eyes with my husband, "this house belongs to me." Sarah scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. "You're having a psychotic break, Serafina. You don't own anything. Marcus made sure of that when you signed the postnup on Friday. You're literally homeless." I didn't get a chance to reply. The soft, heavy purr of a high-performance engine suddenly cut through the tense silence of the neighborhood. A sleek midnight black Maybach glided to the curb, parking directly behind Sarah's obnoxious SUV. The tinted doors opened in perfect unison. 3 individuals stepped out onto the pavement. Leading the way was Harrison Sterling, looking like the absolute embodiment of Manhattan power in a bespoke charcoal suit. At his side, 2 junior associates carried sleek, heavy leather briefcases. They strode up the driveway with absolute precision, their expensive shoes making a rhythmic clicking sound against the concrete. Marcus stared at them, his brow furrowing in deep, panicked confusion. As a senior financial executive, he recognized elite corporate power when he saw it. He knew the difference between a local family lawyer and a team of ruthless corporate litigators. He just couldn't understand why they were marching toward his front porch. Harrison stopped beside me. He offered a deeply respectful nod, completely ignoring the 2 gaping figures on the porch. "Good afternoon, Madam Director," he said smoothly, his resonant voice carrying easily through the humid air. The property transfer protocols have been successfully executed in New York. We have the final confirmation documents right here. Marcus blinked rapidly, his eyes darting from me to the imposing lawyer. Madam Director, he repeated, stepping closer to the porch railing, his voice laced with defensive irritation and a sudden creeping dread. Who are these people, Serafina? If you hired some cheap divorce lawyers to try and contest my postnub, you're wasting your time. I already told you you're cut off. I stopped smiling. The warmth drained from my face, replaced by a cold surgical precision. I stepped over the scattered divorce papers and walked directly to the base of the porch steps. I didn't hire divorce lawyers, Marcus, I said, my voice ringing with an undeniable authority. I brought my corporate acquisitions team because, as it turns out, we have some very urgent landlord-tenant matters to discuss. Sarah let out a sharp, nervous breath. Marcus gripped the wooden porch railing, his knuckles turning white. The absolute certainty in my tone had finally pierced through his massive ego. The trap had officially sprung, and I was about to show them exactly what happened when you pushed a woman into a corner and forgot to check if she was holding a loaded gun. Harrison stepped forward, popping his sleek leather briefcase open with a sharp, satisfying click. He removed a thick stack of documents bound in a heavy black folder and handed it directly to me. I took it, feeling the immense weight of their absolute destruction resting comfortably in my palms. What is this? Marcus demanded, his voice cracking slightly as his corporate bravado began to fracture. I told you, you get nothing. You're holding a notice of immediate foreclosure, I said, tossing the black folder onto the porch next to his pathetic divorce papers. It was issued by Obsidian Holdings LLC. That's the corporate entity that just purchased the primary mortgage and the $50 zero Zeno home equity line of credit you secretly took out against this property. Marcus stumbled backward as if the folder had suddenly burst into flames. How do you know about that? He whispered, all the color draining from his handsome face. I know you forged my signature to leverage the roof over your children's heads, I replied, taking a slow, deliberate step onto the first porch stair. And I know you did it to pay the earnest money on a luxury penthouse for your brother's wife. But here's the truly brilliant part, Marcus. When you so arrogantly signed that post-nuptial agreement on Friday morning, you legally separated our assets. That action triggered an automatic acceleration clause on your hidden debt. You defaulted on the loan the exact second the ink dried. Sarah lunged forward, her silver dress flashing harshly in the afternoon sun. That doesn't matter, she shrieked, her composed, superior facade shattering into 100 jagged pieces. Marcus already signed a quitclaim deed, transferring this property to SRY to settle his debts to my company. You can't foreclose on a house that's already mine. I turned my gaze on her, my expression completely devoid of pity or hesitation. Sarah, you really should consult better lawyers. You can't transfer a deed that is actively encumbered by a defaulted loan. Obsidian Holdings seized this asset at 9 light a.m. this morning. Your fraudulent transfer is completely null and void. You own absolutely nothing. Marcus ran a shaky hand over his face. He was sweating profusely. His expensive bespoke suit suddenly looked suffocating and restrictive. You can't do this to me, he stammered, shaking his head in a frantic denial. I'm a senior executive. I generate massive capital. I'll just pay off the loan tomorrow. I'll liquidate my stock options and bury you in court. I let out a soft, pitying sigh, shaking my head. Pay it off with what, Marcus? Your salary? I snapped my fingers. Harrison immediately handed me a second envelope. This one bearing the unmistakable embossed seal of Marcus's elite financial group. I held it up so the afternoon sun caught the gold foil lettering of his company's logo. You see, Marcus, when I assumed control of the Elias Trust, I gained access to Harrison's elite forensic accounting team. I had them run a deep dive background check on your recent corporate activities. I explained smoothly, taking the final steps to stand directly on the porch. They uncovered a very interesting discrepancy. You didn't just forge my signature for that $50,000. You manipulated a corporate client's escrow account to temporarily cover the gap for Sarah's penthouse deposit while your personal funds cleared. Classic, desperate, and incredibly sloppy embezzlement. Marcus physically staggered, grabbing onto the wooden porch column for support. His dark eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, rasping croak came out. I forwarded that information to your CEO yesterday, I continued, moving face to face with the man who had tormented and financially abused me for 7 years. They had security waiting for you at the door this morning, didn't they? Oh, wait, you took the day off to serve me divorce papers. Well, check your phone, Marcus. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting at noon. You've been terminated for gross financial misconduct. They are freezing your corporate assets and preparing to press criminal charges with the authorities. Marcus fumbled his smartphone out of his pocket with frantic movements. The screen lit up with dozens of missed calls from his legal department and frantic text messages from his former colleagues. A guttural, choked sound escaped his throat as his entire reality, his wealth, his status, his untouchable reputation disintegrated before his eyes. The phone slipped from his grasp, hit the concrete porch, and the screen shattered, mirroring his ruined life. Sarah edged away from him, her eyes darting wildly to her white Range Rover parked in the driveway. She was preparing to flee, eager to abandon the sinking ship she had so gleefully helped poke holes in. "Not so fast, Sarah," I called out, my voice stopping her dead in her tracks. "Did you really think I had forgotten about you?" She spun around, her face pale and twisted with pure panic. "I had nothing to do with his corporate accounts," she stammered defensively, holding her hands up as if to ward off a physical blow. "I'm just a real estate agent. I didn't force him to take that money." "You're a fraud," I corrected her, my tone razor-sharp and merciless. "You operate your flashy little brokerage out of a second-floor executive suite in my building. A suite you are currently 60 days behind on rent for." Sarah gasped, taking another stumbling step backward, as the horrifying realization finally hit her. She looked at Harrison, then at me. The arrogance completely wiped from her features. Uncle Elias required all commercial tenants to adhere to a strict morality and ethical business conduct clause, I recited, quoting the master lease agreement perfectly. Conspiring to defraud a spouse, facilitating forged property documents, and accepting embezzled corporate funds are massive violations of that clause. I officially terminated your month-to-month trial lease at 10 a.m. this morning. Building security has already changed the locks on your office doors and impounded your computers pending a massive fraud investigation. Sarah let out a sharp, panicked whimper. She clutched her designer Birkin bag, pressing it to her chest like a desperate shield. "You can't do this. My client files are in there. My business will be ruined. I'll lose my license. Your business was an illusion," I stated flatly, crossing my arms and looking down at the scattered divorce papers at my feet. "And the illusion is over. You wanted to build a glamorous life by stealing from my children. Now you're going to experience what it really feels like to be thrown out on the street with absolutely nothing." Before Sarah could even attempt to formulate another pathetic excuse, the sharp screech of tires breaking against the curb echoed across the quiet suburban street. A sleek black car pulled up directly behind Harrison Sterling's Maybach. The heavy passenger door swung open with a forceful shove. David stepped out onto the pavement. He wasn't wearing his usual relaxed, carefree smile. His posture was rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped in his cheek. He looked like a man who had just survived a horrific car crash and was now looking at the driver who had intentionally cut the brakes. In his right hand, he clutched a thick manila envelope so tightly the paper was crumpling. "David," Sarah gasped, her voice rising an octave as she took a desperate, trembling step toward the stairs. "Honey, thank God you're here. Serafina has lost her mind. She's trying to ruin my business and Marcus is under attack." "Don't say my name," David roared, his voice cracking like a whip across the lawn. "Don't even look at me." Sarah froze, shrinking back against the brick porch column. Marcus swallowed hard, looking at his older brother with the wide, terrified eyes of a cornered animal. David strode directly up the concrete path, completely ignoring the team of lawyers standing in the driveway. He walked up the porch steps, stopping just inches from the two people who had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. He didn't yell again. When he spoke, his voice was a low, lethal whisper that carried far more devastation than any shout ever could. "I received a very interesting delivery at my office a few hours ago," David said, staring directly at his brother. A courier dropped off a sealed package containing 2 years' worth of hotel receipts, text message transcripts, and photographs. I spent my entire lunch hour reading exactly how my brother and my wife have been laughing at me behind my back. With a sudden violent motion, David slammed the thick envelope directly into Marcus's chest. The seal broke. High-resolution photographs, printed email chains, and credit card statements scattered across the porch, fluttering down to mingle perfectly with the foreclosure notices and meaningless divorce papers. "David, I can explain," Marcus stammered, his corporate vocabulary failing him completely as he looked at the photographic evidence of his affair materializing at his feet. "Explain what, Marcus?" David spat, his voice trembling with deep disgust. "Explain how you slept with my wife in the same hotels we used for family vacations. Explain how you stole money from your own children to buy a penthouse so the two of you could play house. You are a coward and you are no longer my brother." David turned his piercing gaze on Sarah. Her hands were covering her mouth, silent tears of genuine panic streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "My lawyer is filing the divorce petition as we speak," David told her, his tone stripped of any remaining affection. "I've already frozen our joint accounts and contacted our condo's building manager. Your access codes have been disabled. You can retrieve your designer clothes when my attorney says you can. Until then, don't you dare contact me." David didn't wait for her reply. He turned his back on his ruined marriage and his traitorous brother, offering me a single respectful nod before walking directly back to his waiting car. The door slammed shut and the vehicle sped away, leaving an absolute suffocating silence in its wake. I stood on the porch, looking at the two wretched figures standing amidst the scattered paper debris of their shattered lives. The afternoon sun cast long, damning shadows across the concrete. In the span of a single afternoon, Marcus had lost his prestigious executive career, his luxurious home, his financial stability, and the one family member who had ever genuinely respected him. Sarah had lost her business, her fake social status, and her marriage. They had absolutely nothing left, no money, no influence, no place to hide. The utter unmitigated humiliation etched on their pale faces was the exact masterpiece of justice I had so meticulously painted, and the picture was finally complete. Time moves with an incredible brutal velocity when you're no longer carrying dead weight. The fallout from that afternoon on the porch was swift and merciless. The corporate audit at Marcus's former financial firm uncovered a massive trail of embezzled funds, forged escrow accounts, and wire fraud. I didn't even have to set foot inside the courtroom to watch him trade his immaculate custom-tailored navy suits for a standard-issue state prison jumpsuit. His arrogant, untouchable smirk vanished completely as the judge handed down a severe multi-year sentence for grand larceny and corporate fraud. He lost his wealth, his freedom, and every single ounce of his precious pride. Sarah faced an equally devastating reality. The State Real Estate Commission launched a swift investigation into her fraudulent business practices and illegal manipulation of property deeds. She was permanently stripped of her broker's license and buried under a mountain of financial penalties. David finalized a ruthless divorce, leaving her with absolutely nothing. The woman who once bragged about luxury penthouses ended up renting a small rundown studio apartment on the outskirts of the city, completely exiled from the high society circles she once worshipped. As for the Atlanta house, I finalized the foreclosure, sold the property at a premium, and used the profits to establish a college fund for my children. My kids and I left that toxic chapter far behind. We traded the sweltering humidity of suburban Atlanta for the vibrant electric energy of New York City. I am currently standing in the corner executive office on the 60th floor of my iconic Midtown Manhattan skyscraper. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a breathtaking, unobstructed view of Central Park. I am wearing a sleek custom-tailored emerald green Powers suit. The fabric perfectly complements the undeniable power that vibrates in the room. I look down at the heavy mahogany desk in front of me. Resting on the pristine leather blot is the final charter for the Elias Empowerment Initiative. It's a massive grant program specifically designed to provide elite legal counsel, emergency housing, and immediate capital to women who are trapped in financially abusive marriages. Women who were told they had no options. Women who were financially suffocated and made to feel small by men who used their bank accounts as weapons. I pick up a solid gold fountain pen, press the nib to the heavy parchment paper, and sign my name with a bold, sweeping stroke. With that single signature, I authorize a 7F figureur injection of cash into the fund, ensuring that thousands of women find the same freedom I did. I set the pen down and walk slowly to the glass windows, looking out at the vast, magnificent empire I now command. My posture is completely relaxed. My spirit is deeply at peace, and my voice resonates with an absolute lethal certainty. They love to call me Leech. They thought they could bury me under their arrogance and their stolen money, but they forgot one very crucial detail about things you try to bury in the dark. When the roots grow deep enough and strong enough in the blackness, they will effortlessly tear down an entire building when they finally decide to rise.